Hello and welcome. So today I'm going to be talking to you about fantasy role-playing games, more specifically Dungeons and Dragons, and our research looking at whether these role-playing games could be utilised as an effective developmental tool for trainee counsellors. So before we begin, I'll just tell you a little bit about me. So I am, of course, a second-year student on the MSc Counselling course here at Bangor University. And before starting the course, I had no experience whatsoever of role-playing games. I'd maybe seen a little bit on shows like The Big Bang Theory, but that was about the extent of my knowledge. So coming into the second semester of year one, we moved into a different group, and a couple of group members were already very experienced Dungeons and Dragons players. So we decided to give it a go. We thought playing as a group, it would give us a chance to get to know one another, and it was a chance to do a social activity while the pandemic restrictions were still in place. This is my character here. So I played Sephi, who has been brought to life in crochet form by one of the very talented members of our group, and she was essentially a cross between myself and Legolas, because Lord of the Rings was kind of my go-to reference, having had very little experience before. And as an activity, we just found it so enjoyable. We had so much fun, and we felt that it had so much to offer that it wasn't long before we knew we wanted to investigate what the full potential might be. So what would we use this tool for? What's the problem that we're trying to fix? Well, you all know about burnout and how that can affect counsellors and trainee counsellors. So research has shown that work-related stress negatively impacts the social, emotional and physical well-being of counsellors, and of course other healthcare professionals too. And this stress can lead to burnout and compassion fatigue. And with this comes feelings of negativity, maybe hopelessness, powerlessness, emotional exhaustion, and even disenchantment. So what's suggested to help prevent burnout and compassion fatigue? Well, maintaining a balance between the care of others and self-care, perhaps an internal locus of control and higher measures of optimism, increased levels of self-compassion, and more problem-focused approaches to coping rather than emotional-focused coping. Okay, so there's already quite an expansive research base on the benefits of role-playing. So previous research findings have demonstrated that role-playing can improve responsiveness, awareness, understanding, and clarity of communication. It can also enhance growth in social confidence and reduce concerns over making mistakes. It can facilitate a sense of belonging, improve social skills, and enhance the connection with one's own emotions. It can also fulfill players' real-world needs for democracy, spontaneity, and morality. It can expand critical thinking, gives us a chance to experience new perspectives towards problem solving, and we can also test the margins of our own identity. It can also help improve players' sense of self-mastery. It can address identity confusion, increase feelings of competence and autonomy. It can help improve subjectivity, and it can test the boundaries between who we really believe ourselves to be and those personas that we all tend to adopt throughout life. Now, role-playing games have already been used within education, military training, and theatre to develop valuable skills. So how can we use them to help counsellors? So our research question, in its broadest form, was just to investigate whether these fantasy tabletop role-playing games could be used as an developmental tool. Could it improve well-being? Could it improve self-awareness? Could it reduce stress? Maybe it could increase empathy. Could it develop problem-solving and critical thinking? So what is Dungeons and Dragons exactly? Some of you are probably very familiar with it, and others might be watching this thinking, okay, what is this game? How do you actually play? Well, it's a fantasy tabletop role-playing game, and it's fueled by imagination. So the players create characters and come together, and they can explore mystical realms and take on challenges and combat and fight dragons and all that kind of thing that probably springs to mind. It's a non-competitive game, so no player wins or loses. Stories just unfold and unravel into the next, so groups frequently meet for long periods of time. Some groups continue for years and years. It can be what you want it to be. So there's elements of chance which are determined by rolling the dice. So perhaps while you're in combat, maybe you roll a dice to see if you hit your opponent, how much damage you've done. But there's structure provided by a dungeon master. And they lead the story, they make rulings, they kind of act like a bit of a referee, they answer questions, and they take on the roles of additional characters that players might encounter. So these are often referred to as NPCs or non-playing characters. So for instance, if you pass some travellers, they will voice the travellers. If you go into a tavern, they might be the barman there. And they kind of just help move the story along and provide that extra layer of interaction. So what did we do? What was our method? How were we going to investigate whether there was any potential here? Well, we knew we wanted to look specifically at trainee counsellors, so we invited participants that were currently enrolled on the MSc Counselling course. The participants were then divided into playing and non-playing groups, and the playing groups were invited to join 4 2-hour weekly online game sessions. So it was a study over a period of about 4 to 5 weeks. Quantitative data was gathered from pre- and post measures of self-esteem, empathy and stress, and there was a non-playing group where we used their scores for comparison. Qualitative data, which was really what we were most interested in, was obtained from reflective focus groups and conducted with the playing participants after they'd completed all the game sessions. Okay, so we had 2 playing groups, which meant that we needed to keep some sort of consistency between these groups. So the sessions progressed through one overarching storyline. Each session contained an obstacle or dilemma for the participants to consider. Each session also possessed a theme which we felt was relevant to counselling. So we had conflict resolution in the first session, followed by empathy, trust, and then endings, because of course therapeutic endings can be very important. All sessions had an identical scripted introduction. So we had 2 groups and 2 storytellers, but they followed the same script. Game scenarios were planned so that each group would face the same challenges. What they wanted to do in the face of that challenge was up to them, but the challenges presented were kept the same across the groups. And the storytellers communicated between sessions, so they'd update each other on what had happened, what was going to happen next, where they were going to go with the story. And there's a little quote there from one of our game sessions. Okay, so we wanted to make it as accessible as possible because, of course, some participants might have experience playing the game, but for others, like for me, it might be completely new. So prior to the game sessions, we invited all our participants to attend a character building session, and we tried to make this as easy and as simple for them as possible. So we gave them a list of predetermined options, and they were asked to kind of just select whichever appealed most to them, and then begin developing a backstory and a character personality, a little bit of a history of where that character had come from. We provided, as the research team, flowcharts, support sheets, a character support sheet, so you can see one here behind me. And we just use this to make the process as user-friendly as possible. So all the kind of character stats were in the sheets ready. Players didn't really have to do a lot themselves other than come up with a kind of name, choose what they wanted to be, whether that would be a wizard or a barbarian, and just have that little bit of a backstory. Okay, so looking at the results then. So we had pre and post measures of self-esteem, empathy and stress. And we got both the playing and the non-playing groups to do this. So looking at the graphs here, you can see we've got the intervention and the control groups. So intervention were of course the playing groups and the control were the non-playing groups. There is no real clear pattern here, no significant consistency between the two. There was very little change really between self-esteem, stress and empathy in both groups. There's, a very small movement. So that didn't quite give us the clear pattern that maybe we projected. But coming into the results for the focus groups, so this was where our much richer, more detailed qualitative data was going to be obtained, and this gave us a lot more insight into the potential of this developmental tool. So the framework here on the left illustrates the main themes and the sub-themes which were identified as a result of the thematic analysis. So the focus group transcripts were coded by each member of the research team first individually, and then all themes were compared, discussed and verified by each team member to ensure that we had a unified and consistent approach and to ensure high inter-rater reliability. So the main things that came out were escapism, enjoyment, self-exploration and skill development. And within those we had the sub-themes of imagination, wellbeing, accessibility, morals and values, problem solving, and empathy. Okay, so we'll just discuss these in a little bit more detail. So escapism was one of our main themes, and within this we had a sort of sub-theme of imagination. And in the focus groups, participants were talking about how it allowed them to kind of reconnect with their imagination in a way that they hadn't perhaps done since childhood. And it felt very almost nostalgic and reminiscent of childhood pastimes. They also linked it to a childlike sense of wonder and purity. Enjoyment. So all of the participants said that they enjoyed the experience, and they discussed it as improving their wellbeing because it was giving them a chance to take some time for self-care. It helped reduce stress because, of course, they're all on this course and very busy and trying to get assignments in, and it gave them a chance to do something social as well within that busy schedule. Accessibility, they liked that it was, of course, free. We use Teams as our platform, so everybody's familiar with that, all current students. So it's easy to access. The support sheets made it easier for them to understand and kind of keep track of what their character could and couldn't do, maybe if they had some spells, what equipment they had with them. Self-exploration, so it provided a safe space for reflection and self-development. And interesting, a lot of the participants talked about their morals and values and how it allowed them to recognise perhaps the strength of their morals and values, and it gave them a chance to put them to the test. So some of the participants decided that they would like to maybe be a slightly more evil character, and they started off that way and found that by, first, second, maybe third game at a push, they just couldn't do it. It just felt really uncomfortable, and they kind of melted back to their own ethical code. And the participants also talked about skill development. They felt it had helped with listening skills, communication, teamwork, confidence, and organisation. And they also really liked that it required creative problem solving. And I think that was partly due to the way we designed the campaign. They felt that it increased empathy through experiencing and acknowledging other perspectives. So the perspective of their own character, and also trying to understand the perspectives of all the other characters and the NPCs that were involved. Okay, so what about the limitations of this pilot study? Well, participants only played the game for a relatively short period of time. But because we were asking very busy students to participate, we felt that 4 sessions was the maximum really that we could ask them to commit before this demand would kind of override any interest they might have in becoming involved. The sample size was small, but they were all actively involved as trainee counsellors, and these were precisely the population that the tool would be intended for. The second playing group, Group B, was smaller than we'd perhaps hoped it would be, so I actually participated as a character in that group to kind of just help facilitate more interaction and more engagement and a little bit more opportunity for those players to really experience what the game was going to be like. So we felt we needed to do that. It meant that the results might be subject to some bias, but we felt that it was more important to give them an accurate game experience. So what are the implications of these findings then? Well, having an enjoyable, scheduled, easily accessible group activity ensured that participants took time for themselves, and this may help maintain regular self-care, which is a strong factor in burnout prevention. Players often choose to create characters who embody similar or exaggerated qualities to their own, or those they desire. So the character design process itself might facilitate self-reflection, which is, of course, an essential skill for trainee counsellors, widely encouraged on all training programmes. All participants demonstrated compassion towards the NPCs, and increased levels of compassion may encourage self-compassion, which has been shown to prevent compassion fatigue. Many of the participants expressed enjoying the creative approach to problem solving, which was required by our campaign, and these findings support the tool as a means of improving problem solving and critical thinking. More problem-focused approaches to coping have been shown to reduce compassion fatigue. Participants also commented on an awareness of a team dynamic, which could enhance teamwork skills and is of particular importance for those trainees who want to maybe go into an organisation or work within a multidisciplinary team after qualifying. So the joy experienced in this kind of escapism and recapturing that childlike use of imagination was linked by our participants to a sense of purity and wonder that does tend to get lost amidst the busy schedule that we all have as adults, and responsibilities and daily routines, and in our case assignments and dissertations and presentations. But being able to reawaken and reconnect with that long forgotten part of ourselves is perhaps another beneficial offering of the world of fantasy roleplay. And as Rogers himself has been described as an imaginative character, perhaps that this is an overlooked quality which should be more widely encouraged among counsellors. Though role-playing is already employed as an effective means of skill development across other settings, these findings do illustrate how it could be more specifically relevant to counselling. Not only could this tool help trainee counsellors to reduce stress, but also to flourish as both individuals and professionals. So how easy would it be to implement? How feasible would this be to actually run as an intervention? Well, on a practical level, it would be relatively easy to organise an online community of Dungeons & Dragons groups for interested trainees and counsellors. Accessibility would be unproblematic because we could use platforms such as Teams, and most current students are familiar with those, and groups could just be self-regulated. It would be much easier if there were some dungeon masters with previous knowledge of the game that could help set things up. Maybe they could make some support sheets that would allow players to find their sessions more accessible, a bit more ready-made. But the responsibility would lie with the dungeon master to ensure that the game content was, of course, inoffensive and that players conducted themselves appropriately. But there may be a self-selecting bias here anyway with counsellors, that perhaps as people we are naturally considerate of others and, wouldn't like to rock the boat too much in group activities such as this. So future research then, what could the next step be? Well, it would be valuable to extend these findings and aim to establish this adaptation of fantasy role-playing games more solidly as a viable and verifiable developmental tool. Studies could be conducted over longer periods, and this may demonstrate more measurable impacts on stress, empathy, self-esteem, and overall well-being. And that may also afford an opportunity for greater self-exploration through extended character development, and richer escapism through deeper immersion and more complex plot lines. As one story unravels into another, characters might develop, and so on. After more firmly establishing the benefits for trainee counsellors, future studies might also investigate qualified counsellors and then extend this to other high-stress careers such as those in the medical profession or educators. So what does this all mean? What can we do with all this information? Well, the findings suggest that this developmental tool could offer the opportunity to enhance counsellor wellbeing through escapism and enjoyment, reconnecting with imagination, encouraging regular engagement in self-care, reducing stress, gaining self-awareness through self-exploration, increasing empathy, enhancing communication, improving teamwork, developing problem-solving, and facilitating critical thinking. So to conclude then, what's the take-home message for today? Well, although the generality of the current results must be established by future research, this study has provided clear support for the potential utilisation of Dungeons & Dragons as an effective developmental tool for trainee counsellors. So thank you very much for listening, and I will be on hand to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you.